Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Terre, Haute. This congregation welcomes all people, regardless of their age, religion, race, nationality, ability, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or anything else that has been used to divide people. We are a group of people with our own opinions, our own ideas, our own dreams. But we share ideals. We share a common belief in a liberal religion. In our discussions, we may disagree with each other, but we must always remember that what unites us is stronger than what separates us. We must always end the service aware of the love that we have for each other. Today's In Being You, we focus on the second principle. We affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. For our opening words, we have number 443. We arrive out of many singular rooms. We arrive out of many singular rooms, walking over the branching streets.
We come to be assured that brothers and sisters surround us to restore their images on our eyes.
We enlarge our voices in common speaking and singing.
We try again that solitude found in the midst of those who with us seek their hidden reckonings.
Our eyes reclaim the remembered faces. Their voices stir the surrounding air.
The warmth of their hands assures us, and the gladness of our spoken names.
This is the reason of cities, of homes, of assemblies in the houses of worship.
It is good to be with one another. Kenneth L. Patton.
And our opening hymn, which is number 203.
All creatures of the earth and sky, come, kindred, lift your voices high. Alleluia, alleluia, bright burning sun with golden beam, soft shining moon with silver gleam. Alleluia, alleluia.
And our transitional words are number 459. This is the mission of our faith, to teach the fragile art of hospitality, to revere both the critical mind and the generous heart, to prove that diversity need not mean divisiveness, and to witness to all that we must hold the whole world in our hands. Our program today is going to be presented by our own Dr. Nathan Meyers, and his topic is UU principles are the new normal and what needs to change.
So it's good to see everybody. Some of you I've seen periodically when we've had, lunch outside and some different things during the last few months, but I've been largely absent since our son Lincoln is 6 years old and doesn't really do social distancing or mask wearing all that well. So we've kind of been keeping him a little bit sequestered, from certain things. So it's good to be with you all today. Thanks to Jackie and Betsy for doing the opening words, or doing all the words and the hymns and everything. They selected all of that because frankly I'm still recovering from the semester, so my brain was a little tired and needed a little bit of a helping hand with things. So I was trying to think of an analogy to kind of how I'm feeling right now as far as this whole situation with the COVID-19 and the changing guidance, and whether you should wear a mask, whether you shouldn't wear a mask, all that kind of stuff. And the best I've been able to come up with, I don't know how many of you have seen or remember the movie Poltergeist from the 80s, I think. But for those of you who don't know it, it's about essentially a family that has unfriendly spirits in their house that cause a lot of problems throughout the course of the movie. And eventually they have an exorcism, and the woman who comes in and does the exorcism says, "This house is clean," for those of you who might remember that. And then they think everything is fine, and then a few nights later, all heck breaks loose, and I think their house ends up imploding on itself or something at the end of the movie. But anyway, that's kind of how I feel with some of the stuff that's going on now. I feel like on one hand, there's a sense that, things are returning to normal and everything's fine, but I still have kind of that anxiety that, another shoe is going to drop and, things are going to take a turn for the worse. So I think it's just kind of emblematic of the fact that this year has been a difficult time, a confusing time for all of us this past year and a half. It's been troubling in different ways. Some of us have, I don't know if any of you have been ill yourselves at any point. Hopefully not. But many of us have known somebody who's been ill. A few of us have lost loved ones over the course of the pandemic. You may know my grandmother passed away back in December of complications due to COVID. So for those of you who have lost anyone due to the pandemic or due to any other reason, you have my condolences. I know it's a very difficult time to lose loved ones. And it's going to make it that much harder, I think, to adjust to the new normal, given everything that's happened. And one of the things that concerns me, kind of having done some research into what happened in 1918 with the pandemic, historians talk about the fact that there was a sense of societal amnesia, that once the 1918 pandemic was over, people were so eager to move past it and get back to normal that people just kind of put it aside and didn't talk about it, didn't write about it. Until decades later, when historians started to really dig into it. And it's going to be harder for us to do this because there's so many, there's so much evidence of the pandemic in terms of television programs and movies that have dealt with it, and there's a lot of evidence that's going to get left behind. that this is going to happen, and to remind us that we always need to remember what's happened and learn from the experience. One thing that I've noticed, sort of observing things and reading about things and living during this time, is the fact that our UU principles that we talk about each week have really been useful guidelines for living through the pandemic, and I think sort of moving on to the next stage of living in sort of the post-pandemic period. So my wife helpfully reminded me at one point, remember you're supposed to talk about, at least one of the UU principles, and I told her, don't worry, I'm gonna try to hit them all. So I won't take too much time, but I think I'm gonna address them all during the course of the talk. So the first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So this has been something that's been, I think, in the forefront from the beginning of the pandemic. I mean, we've really counted on those people who have been considered essential workers, which are the grocery store employees, the people working in Amazon warehouses, the people who are working in drive-thrus, truck drivers, nurses, teachers, all these people that have been on the front lines trying to keep certain things going that we've counted upon each and every day. And of course, the counterpoint to that is, we're having this ongoing political debate about, the minimum wage and access to health care and providing affordable daycare and paid family leave and all these kinds of policies. And we still have a lot of political division, so those debates are still going to be ongoing, and it's unlikely we're going to see any major sweeping changes in the near future. But I think the pandemic is a reminder that we need to continue to push for those kinds of policies to instill more fairness and more opportunity for those people who work in these industries and don't make a ton of money, but don't have the option of working from home and all of those sorts of things. And as a result had to put themselves at greater risk. I personally was very fortunate to work in an area where I had no problem working from home, and I was able to socially distance and all of that, but reminding ourselves that in the case there is an emergency in the future, the degree to which these people who work in these essential industries are able to protect themselves are going to have bearing on how well our society as a whole is able to weather perhaps the next emergency. The second principle kind of leans into that as well: justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. So another thing that's come out during the course of the pandemic is that there remain a lot of social inequalities, and this applies both to healthcare and, of course, we've been struggling with issues of policing and the level of inequity that exists in treatment among certain groups and police, with the Black Lives Matter protests and the George Floyd murder and all of the events that came out of that. So we need to continue to look at those issues even as we kind of get into this period of the new normal, because when we talk about inequity of access to health care, that leaves all of us vulnerable, and I think that's something that's become more evident during the course of the pandemic is, it's not just about our individual health, it's about the health of our community and who has access to health care and who doesn't. We're struggling with vaccine access right now. The number of people getting vaccine is, trending, it appears, in the right direction. Indiana still has a ways to go to kind of get where it needs to be. So whatever we can do individually and as a group to encourage people to get vaccinated is useful. But obviously we still have the same issues of minority populations and low-income people having difficulty accessing the vaccine. So addressing those issues and providing support for those groups. and also thinking globally in terms of other countries and the problems they're experiencing right now. India is getting hit really hard, as I'm sure many of you have seen in the news, but a number of other countries as well are having resurgences. So recognizing that, you know, we need to have compassion for all of these different populations, all these different countries around the world, and do what we can to improve their situations. The third principle, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. This was a little bit of a more challenging one for me to sort of think about in terms of, you know, because I was thinking in terms of what has my spiritual growth been during all of this. And I think part of it kind of goes along with what Rex was saying as far as not sort of counting on having tomorrow to do something, but to recognize that, you know, time can be a limited thing, you know, opportunities can go away. So I think one thing that I've kind of thought about is, you know, some of the things that maybe I was thinking about, you know, a decade down the road. You know, one of the things, you know, my wife has never traveled outside of the United States. I've only actually been out of the country one time in my life, back when I was in high school. And that's one of those things where we always said, oh yeah, we'll do it, we'll get there eventually. But that's one of the things that I think we need to recognize. We need to do that sooner rather than later. So I think that kind of gets to assessing priorities. You know, what's really important, you know, what should we really be focusing on, as opposed to kind of when we get to the end of our time, you know, what are we going to look back on and wish that we had done that we didn't accomplish? So I think I've been doing that. So sort of thinking along those lines, you know, thinking about what we really can't live without. And, you know, if you had asked me before the pandemic and you told me I would go a year and a half without seeing a movie in the theater, you know, I would have thought, like, what are you talking about? Like, that's, you know, that's crazy. But, you know, now having gone a year and a half without being in a movie theater or even really eating in a restaurant that much, you know, you realize that those things aren't really important, and you start to focus on the bigger picture. Fourth principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. This one is also a challenging one because we as a congregation embrace diversity. We embrace a lot of different types of thought and different opinions. But the thing that's challenging is, you know, we live in a society where the very idea of facts and truth are being challenged on a daily basis, that people are rejecting, you know, very clear evidence, you know, of events that were broadcast on television, that we all watched on television. They're questioning, you know, the number of people that died during the pandemic and all these kinds of things. So, you know, we need to continue to respect diversity of opinion and diversity of thought, but at the same time, defend the idea that there is such a thing as scientific evidence, that there is such a thing as objective reality, and sort of try to, you know, talk to people. You know, I've had a lot of conversations over the course of the pandemic with people kind of questioning, you know, the kinds of things that I was talking about, and, you know, trying to be respectful, but being strong in the idea that, you know, we can't reject the idea that there are facts. We can't completely reject science. You know, we can disagree on interpretation, we can disagree on how certain things are done, but we need to all be kind of dealing with the same plane of reality. The fifth principle, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and society at large. So I think in some ways our society and our country can be proud of the fact that, you know, in 2020, despite all of the challenges, you know, we did have an election. We did carry out our democratic processes. A lot of people did participate in different ways, whether it was in-person voting or mail-in voting or what have you. So I think from the perspective of showing that our democracy can be durable even under the most challenging conditions, we have something to be proud of there. But now we're in this sort of post-election period where there are, as I'm sure you've all noted, ongoing efforts to in some ways make voting more difficult or limit opportunities to voting and opportunities to vote, and maybe limiting certain groups' access to the ballot. So it's important that we as a congregation continue to champion the idea of democracy for everybody, and that everybody should have equal access to the ballot, regardless of the condition, whether it's a pandemic or whatever might be going on in society at that time. Making democracy easier to practice for the most vulnerable in our society is critical, I think, because it's the people, as we've seen over the course of the last year and a half, it's the most vulnerable who have the most to lose if we don't have good leadership in charge of our government. So they should be given an opportunity to express their voice as much as anyone. The sixth principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And again, this kind of goes into the idea that this was a global, pandemic, as we all know. There's a lot of countries, even though things are getting better here, there's a lot of issues in India. I've even been reading Canada is having a lot of problems, obviously much closer to home. There's been resurgence around the world. So recognizing that even though in our backyard things are seeming brighter and we seem to have more opportunities and can be safer, to recognize that there are challenges out there. And I was participating in a Zoom meeting the other day where they talked about the fact that every county in Indiana now has had at least a few cases of one of the variants from around the world. So what's going on in other countries is coming to affect us here at home, so appreciating that. But thinking more globally in terms of vaccine access and doing more to promote better health practices in other countries and access to health care in other countries is going to be important moving forward, not just because it's a good humanitarian goal to expand access, but it could be critical for protecting ourselves here in the United States if something else were to occur in the future. Most of the world, most countries in the world don't have capacity to manufacture their own vaccines, so they are dependent on countries like the United States to do that work. And then you have countries like India that actually do a lot of vaccine manufacturing, but because they got hit so hard by the pandemic, they weren't able to do nearly as much as we expected them to do as far as manufacturing those resources. So we have to plan for those sorts of eventualities. And then the seventh and final principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. I've talked in a previous discussion about the idea of communitarianism, which is essentially the idea that we need to respect people's individual rights and we need to stand up for our rights as individuals, but we also have to recognize our responsibility to the larger community, whether it's our congregation or whether it's Terre, Haute, or whether it's sort of the global community. So we need to keep those thoughts in mind. Again, I've had a lot of discussions with friends from high school and college about mask wearing and what that means for individual freedom, or vaccine mandates and what that means for individual freedom. But and the thing that I've tried to come to terms with them about is the idea that yes, you do have your individual freedom, but there's also the idea that you're getting vaccinated or you're wearing a mask to protect others and keep others safe. So promoting that to people that might not be naturally receptive to those kinds of views. And I've also talked about the idea of One Health, which I think is something I talked about the last time I spoke, which was quite some time ago. But the idea that human health and the health of animal populations and environmental issues like climate change and all of that, it's all interconnected. All of these issues are interconnected. So we can't separate out concern about climate change, or we can't separate out concerns about how we deal with agriculture and the raising of livestock for meat purposes and things like that. These are not separate issues. It's all interconnected, and we need to think of things in a more holistic way moving forward. So we all wish that the pandemic had never occurred, or we wish that it had been handled differently and stopped early on, so those people who have lost their lives would still be with us. The businesses that have gone out of business were still operational. People's lives wouldn't be disrupted. A lot of children had been out of school. We've all lost a lot of time. We've all lost a lot of opportunity over the course of the year and a half. But as we proceed into kind of the next phase, we do have to honor those people who have passed on and those people who have lost businesses and suffered the effects of mental illness and emotional distress by looking at how the lessons of the pandemic can make humanity stronger moving forward. And we can do that locally, nationally, and globally. And part of the reason the pandemic was as bad as it was, in my opinion, is because of things that were considered normal. Income inequality, inequities in healthcare, all these things were just kind of considered, that's just the way things are. Some people are going to have access to certain services or certain opportunities, and some people aren't. And we need to really look at those policies moving forward and try to make adjustments. And again, not just thinking about this would be a good thing to do, this would be a kind thing to do, but this is an essential thing to do for the protection of our families and our health. So we need a new normal that acknowledges the vulnerable of so many, the vulnerable people in our society, and the fact that the vulnerabilities of some are really vulnerabilities of us all. If we have people who aren't able to socially distance, if we have people who have to go to work no matter what, this creates a threat to all of us. But it also creates an opportunity to make those people's lives better and to promote policies, to promote change, to give them more opportunity and more protection. So the conclusion I've come to is that UU principles are not just principles of faith. They're really principles of survival, they're principles of living, they're principles of public policy. And I know, given the divisiveness, the fact that we literally have a 50-50 U.S. Senate at this point, things are not going to change overnight. But as long as we remember what's happened and the challenges that it's brought and the pain that it's brought, and the love that we have for those who've passed on, and our desire to make sure that their lives counted for something, we'll continue to press for change and to promote a new normal that everybody can live in opportunity and protection and be less vulnerable. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I hope moving forward to be here more in the coming months. So, thanks.
Our closing hymn is number 348, Guide My Feet.
Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain.
was our challenge for the day. Our closing words are number 434. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other.
May the blessings of love rest upon you. May peace abide with you. May God's presence illuminate your heart now and forevermore.
Go in peace, know that you are loved and that your life is sacred.